I won't run on.
I'm just.
So, of course, I put wrong pair of glasses in my, oh, you got the wrong cord, I've got the wrong glasses.
Like that.
Can we, can someone who's closer to the screen say who's on online?
That's from. Get this to the legislature.
Do you think there's any like scrolling to be done, or is it what you see is?
Yeah, are there are no more than that, it's not, if you scrolled further down, you wouldn't, if you got rid of that AI impression. No, but
That's it.
thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, I'm Amanda Beal, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, and I am co-chair of this National Working Lands Group. Tom Abello, our other co-chair, was planning to be here, but something came up. He needed to be in a meeting over in the State House. So he won't be able to join us today, sends his regrets. But I know we have a really great round of speakers today. I think just by way of sort of reminder, we are mandated to meet at least 2 times a year in the way that we've been using these meetings in the last year or so, year and a half has been to really take the time to hear what folks are doing out there in the world in terms of working towards the goals in our climate action plan that pertain to the Natural Working Lands Group in particular. You've had presentations from some of our state programs, but we're also pulling in organizations that are all over the state and doing great work as well, just to make sure we're getting a good wholesome picture of the great work that's happening. And we're also going to have a legislative session recap from Emily Horton, who's our policy director at DAC. And so I do know that although one presenter was not able to be here today, had a last minute sort of family emergency, and that's Bethany Atkins from IF&W, but we will make sure that the next time we're together, we pull her back in for the presentation on land conservation from the IF&W perspective. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jody, and I think we're going to do a round of introductions just because it's been a while since we've all been together.
Well, nice to see everyone. And it sounds like we have at least two work group members online. So why don't we start introductions online? And Dana, would you like to go?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Dana Duran, Executive Director, Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast.
Thank you. And Chris.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there today. Chris Cabot, Maine Farmland Trust.
Thank you. And Andy.
Good afternoon. This is Andy Whitman with the Maine Forest Service.
Thanks. And I'll say hi to you, Patrick. I know you're not on the work group any longer, but you're on the Climate Council still. Am I understanding that correctly? Or are you still on this as well?
I think I'm still on that. Nobody's kicked me off yet.
Good. I'm wrong.
I'm on
right here.
I'm on the Climate Council as well, and retired, but still active on special projects for the Maine Forest Products Council.
Forgive me. I see you right here. Great.
Invited.
So I'm Jody Sapphire. I'm Deputy Commissioner at DACF, and I'll go to that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Emily Horton. I'm the Director of Policy and Community Engagement at the Department of Ag, Conservation and Forestry.
Andy Cutco, Director of the Bureau of Parks and Lands and DACF.
Jake Metzler, Vice President of Stewardship and Conservation for Forest Society, Maine.
Hi, I'm Nicole Rogers. I'm the Landowner Outreach Forester with the Maine Forest Service.
I'm not on the canal. What? Oh, you're. Oh, Patty Cormier, Director of Maine Forest Service, not on the committee.
And Heather Spalding, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association.
Hi, I'm Ellen Griswold. I'm the Managing Director of Programs at Wolfson Center.
I am new to this group. My name is Steve Pulio. I'm the Director of Planning for the town of Wyndham.
I'm John Naylor, owner, president of Rosemont Market and Bakery. Hi, I'm Molly Doherty with the Maine Natural Areas Program, which is a division of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry.
And I'm Craig Lapine. I'm the director of the Bureau of Ag, Food, and Rural Resources.
Ivan Fernandez, University of Maine.
Philip Demain, Ajay, Wildlife Diversity Section Manager, Maine Fish and Wildlife.
I'm Gordon. I'm in the Commissioner's Office at the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, and I help staff the Natural and Working Lands Work Group.
Maggie Kelly Boyd, the Senior Resilience Coordinator with the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future.
Thank you all. Well, so as the commissioner said, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 speakers today rather than 6, which gives us a little bit more breathing room. And there are additional questions that you all have about any of the presentations. We have time for that. And if not, we'll probably end a little bit early today. So I'm just going to turn it right over to Emily, who's going to give us a legislative session roundup. Really glad you're here.
Thanks, Jody. So I created this presentation within the 15-minute time frame. So it's my kind of speed dating of the 132nd legislature, but I can slow down and maybe if there's questions afterwards, we can do that. And so I'm going to recap the last 2 sessions. This does not include, all 2,000 bills that were introduced, but I did kind of focus on the department's priorities and the natural working lands group. Next slide, Tom. So this is a quick overview. There were a little over 2,200 bills total introduced. 76 of those were to the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee. That is fairly typical. We testify on usually about 100 each session in other committees total. There were 984 bills enacted. 5 bills recalled and not enacted again. 794 bills were signed into law. 174 bills became law without signature, and 8 bills were vetoed in total. So those numbers may not totally add up because some bills were introduced but not necessarily referred to committee. Next slide, Tom. So I don't need to go over your goals for this group, but this is how I framed the legislation that I pulled in this order. So increasing local food production, land conservation, and then forestry, carbon kind of related legislation. Next slide, Tom. So for land conservation, this is just kind of a handful of bills that I pulled through the last 2 sessions. LD 15, so going from left to right, LD 1528 was Senator Brenner's bill to fund the Working Farmland Access Protection Program. That died on adjournment this spring. LD 593 was Senator Black's bill to fund the Land for Maine's Future program through the biennial budget. I think originally it was 10 million over 2 years. That died on adjournment. LD 1072 was the LMF option to purchase at ag value for LMF that passed and signed into law this July, giving LMF more tools for farmland conservation. LD 1976 was our department major substantive rules to finalize the high value ag land permitting program that we did. LD 183, a lot of you probably remember this one from the first session. This was to cap publicly owned lands by more than 50%. That died in the committee room. And 1953, ensure public access for, this was a land liability program. And that was signed into law last June as well.
Some of you in the room worked on some of these. And so if you have other insights or perspectives on them, I think you should just jump in, if you want to add color to any of these.
Yeah, I could certainly add color to each one of these. I'm going to just keep with the facts for most of this. Next slide. LD 2006 was a department bill. Andy Cutco's. This was to give BPL authority for 2 land transactions or 3 land transactions in Aroostook and Somerset counties. LD 1312, I think a lot of you know, this was the LMF funding that it was Senator Peirce's bill, which they added to the budget to create ongoing funding for the Land for Maine's Future program through the budget stabilization. So this was first a bill, and then they moved that into the governor's budget, which is a huge, huge win for land conservation. 1308 was the bill to create a working group to explore opportunities to maintain public access of land. That was signed into law last spring. The working group met, introduced recommendations this spring. Jody and Andy, I know, were both, and others were a part of that group. The committee took those recommendations and pushed out a committee report. They had the authority to do that, which was LD 350, and that became law unsigned this past April. And so really pushing a lot of those recommendations to the Landowner Advisory Board. Just looking, LD 14, well, LD 1762 was the bill to establish a recreational trails program, kind of similar to the Land for Maine's Future program, but for trails. That died in committee last spring. LD 14, what is the bill? It passed and was funded on appropriations to provide free access to Indigenous peoples to state parks. That was a bill that was introduced a couple years, throughout the years, and finally just passed and was funded. And same with 1547 to fund the Maine Snowmobiles Trail program. That was signed into law in April. Next slide. So bills to, in my mind, to help support local food consumptions. LD 1141 was pretty historic. This was one that DACF worked with the Department of Corrections, with DAFS, Department of Education, to allow for the states to purchase off contract and to have essentially more flexibility to purchase and more funding to purchase local foods. I believe we can now purchase above 15% of the contract for local food purchasing, which is really great. It's a huge bill. LD 468 was funded and passed into law. This was a bill. This bill was 500,000 one-time funding, right, Craig, I believe, to match nutrition incentive, federal and public and private funding for the nutrition incentive program that DACF runs. So this was state funding through the general fund, 500,000 one time.
I think it's 6, and I think it's ongoing. No? There's the nutrition incentives.
Yeah. And LD 1925, this bill changed some of the language around the Maine Farms for the Future program, creating more flexibility and access for farmers to access this program. And that was signed into law last June. Next slide. So forest carbon and forestry related legislation. So there are a lot of other bills related to forestry. Obviously, over the 132nd, I kind of focused on kind of the core group's work. LD 39 was a department bill that passed last May, which created the forest carbon registration. LD 1630 was the act to amend the open space tax law. That was ONTP last May. But I would just note that LD 2244, just recently at the end of the legislature, the tax committee created a new committee bill based off of their jurisdiction with the Property Tax Relief Task Force. And this bill was signed into law, which will create, or which directs staffs to create a survey to assessors of the tree growth tax. So they're pulling data and kind of information, and they're going to be pushing out these findings for recommendations to the tax committee next
legislature. So this is going to be one of those bills that is going to come back. Definitely the forestry related folks will be paying attention to this next session.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's asking tax assessors whether they like the tree growth program, which not all of them are in favor of. So it's not exactly an unbiased survey that's going to occur. So it's a threat to land conservation.
I would just note that in crafting the survey, it will include the Maine Forest Service and other forestry related Maine revenue, and a couple others I think are noted in the legislation.
It's still questioning tree growth, which is a huge question to be throwing out there. So
yeah. And then LD 1529, that was the LSOG bill that passed last July, and I know the working group has been working through.
Why would you say what LSOG is?
Late succession loan, for all those who LSOG just doesn't roll off the tongue. Old forest, basically.
I feel like LSOG rolled off a lot easier. Next slide. So there were a lot of bonds introduced. I actually counted them. I wanted to make sure I had the right number. There were 76 bonds introduced in the 132nd. We testified on all of these that are listed here. Obviously, there were a lot more. They all didn't get through the AFA committee. LD 2094 was our department bill, our ag forestry bond that the commissioner introduced this session. They used that as a vehicle to pass a package bond. Our bill was originally for $40 million to fund agriculture, forestry, infrastructure, farmland protection, a number of different programs at our department. The committee increased it to 45 million, included a number of other bonds, moved that through the Appropriations Committee. In the Senate, it was stripped again back to the original ag forestry bond at 45 million. It passed. It was engrossed and enacted in the Senate, moved to the House, was engrossed and failed on 2/3 enactment by about 6 votes. So we tried again. LD 299 was amended to include the language of the ag forestry bond. Again, it received more support in the Senate, was enacted, went to the House, again was engrossed in the House, and again failed on enactment by 6 votes. So, I think there was a lot of support, a lot of people coming to the State House for that. Certainly laid a lot of groundwork for continued conversations, and I think there will be an effort again next session, my hope is. And I know the commissioner and the governor's office is supportive of that effort as well. And then just I threw in cross-cutting land issues because I know that's been a topic of this group. So a number of bills here. LD 1661 was the invasive species bill requiring a review of assessments of states' management efforts. That was signed into law. LD 2118 was to move the Maine Natural Areas Program to IF&W. That was passed and signed into law. LD 307, that was the Maine Data Center Coordination Council. If you don't know that was vetoed, you're probably the last person in the state to know that. But that was vetoed and the governor signed an executive order essentially creating a council. And if you haven't read that veto letter, I would encourage you to do that. It was well done. And then lastly, LD 1870 was the originally Superfund bill. What passed was directing DEP to do an assessment of the costs of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And that was signed into law. Next slide, Tom. This is the last slide. I just wanted to highlight just because, this working group has been going on for 7 years. A lot of our work has been going on, for 7 years. These are just some of the things that I think we should all be really proud about. related to this work and to the department's work. The left are programs, which I know others will talk about, that have been created through statute, built from scratch, staffed, funded in some cases. So really just a lot of work over the past 7 years there. And then on the right is some of the funding that's been dispersed with legislature's authority or direction, with support of the governor. And I mean, all of those, if you look at that, adds up to almost 200 million. Just a massive amount of funding that has gone out into these industries over the past 7 years. And I think everyone's voices here around this table, the commissioner saying, let's keep at it, keep going, asking for more money, asking to keep it, get these programs up and running, having a governor who, and Tom Abello too, getting these things over the finish line. None of this would have been possible without all these voices and these different, spaces. So I think we have a lot to be proud of. And I'll just leave it there. Yeah. And we can share this.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. Great. We'll make sure we do that. You probably all receive the same emails that I get. Some of them are sent to my work, some at home, and they're from different nonprofit organizations who are doing legislative wrap-ups and what was accomplished during this legislative session. And I've signed up for 2 of them, and I have not been able to make either of them, but my sense from even the promotion of that talk is largely positive, that most organizations that are focused on many other things, but certainly the Natural Working Lands Work Group's recommendations as part of their work, see this as a really positive legislative session. And I don't know if, I think it squares with essentially what you summarized, Emily.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, a number of those accomplishments that Emily had on the last slide, we didn't get all of those on the first try. So it's really, just to keep that in mind. There are some things that we didn't get this legislative session that I think it's worth trying again for. But we'll see what happens when we get to the 133rd. And it's so intensive when the legislature is in session. I just want to thank Emily and everyone who plays a role in following all these bills and advocates, people who are showing up at the State House and lending their support and their voice. I mean, that makes a huge, huge difference. So we have done a lot in the last several years, but there's a lot of work still to do. So that's why we're all still here.
Any last thoughts before we pivot to our next speaker? Okay. Well, we have Nicole Rogers here, who we're lucky to have in the Maine Forest Service as the landowner outreach forester. And she's going to be speaking about the Woods Wise Resilience Program. So let's turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. Okay, so Jody asked if I would come and speak about this program. This is new for us. We just launched it back in May. I'll share some of the stats on who's already signed up and participating, but the numbers look good. We're really happy with what we're seeing so far. And we feel like this is a program that has the potential to really change not only the way that we at the Maine Forest Service interact with landowners, but ultimately just to do some really excellent work in the woods that we've been hearing from folks for a long time they would like to be able to do if funding weren't an issue, which I think it is for many of us in many scenarios. So we're really happy to be able to do this. If I can get the next slide, please. All right, so up front, we got $9 million back in 2023. It came in right in December. There was an administration change, some funding went on pause for a little bit. And so this program has been sort of coming into the works for a while, but we've just been able to launch it because, again, just some timing considerations and some priority changes over the change of administration. But we have $9 million coming through the U.S. Forest Service supporting landowner cost share payment program. So that's who the funding comes to us from. And this came through 2 funding lines. There's the climate mitigation and forest resilience funding line, through which we received $4 million. And then there's the carbon stewardship line, through which we received $5 million. That matters a little bit in terms of who is eligible or which pot of money, but it doesn't matter in terms of what practices are available to landowners. We've kept that consistent. So we're basically treating this as one larger cost share program. These payments do need to go directly to landowners. So that was part of the grant when it came to us from the Forest Service. There's a little bit for overhead, and then the bulk of this goes directly to Maine landowners, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. There are a lot of people using the term resilience now. I think I counted it 3 times in the slides that Emily showed, if not more. So this is a term that we're hearing a lot, right? And so we acknowledge that there may be different definitions for how people are defining resilience. But for us, within the context of this program, we're emphasizing forest resilience, and we're defining this as a measure of how well forests adapt and respond to changing conditions. Thinking about a resilient forest basically is one that can bounce back after disturbances. So these could be windstorms, these could be insect outbreaks, it could be a whole slew of things we haven't even thought about yet. But at the crux, when a forest is resilient, even if some trees or some species are lost, that forest ecosystem persists. So that's how we're defining resilience in the context of this program, forests that are ready to tackle what's coming at them and still be forests after the fact. All right, next slide, please. So within this program, we have 3 categories of practices that we're supporting. They're the early stand tending practices, the regeneration support practices, and forest health practices. I'll go into a little detail about what each practice is specifically, but these are the broad buckets for which landowners can apply and receive funding to do work in the woods. There are a lot of practices that can be beneficial for Maine's forests. The ones that we picked came through this collaborative process. So we talked with consulting foresters, we talked with landowners, we talked with scientists, and we used in-house expertise from the Maine Forest Service. And again, really wanted to focus on things that we were hearing from all of those audiences to be beneficial, but also cost prohibitive. We also know that landowners in particular own land for a whole bunch of different reasons. And if this program is going to be successful, having practices that help them meet a bunch of different goals or potentially meet a bunch of different goals is going to be important too. So that's how we chose the practices that we chose. They help with things that are cost prohibitive, and they help meet multiple goals while still all circling back to enhancing the resilience of Maine's forests. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit more about what these practices are. So for this category of early stand tending, these are practices that happen early in the life of a forest stand. So early intervention in a forest, maybe to reduce the density or shift the species composition. To do that, we have 3 practices that landowners are eligible to apply for: pre-commercial thinning, early commercial thinning, and crop tree release. So stands that look like this, maybe we want to move them towards longer lived species. Maybe we recognize with things like the drought we had last summer and probably will have this summer, that density just opens those stands up to a whole slew of forest health issues. So that's why we focused on these. All right, next slide, please. So for our second category of practices, regeneration support, these are actions that are targeted at helping regeneration establish or grow, whether that's planted trees or naturally regenerating forests. We have 3 practices within this category as well. So planting, this could be assisted migration planting for folks that are thinking about species or genotypes that might be beneficial from a little further south of us. Could also be enrichment planting if people have done activities in the woods in the past and they're not seeing regeneration come back for the species or the number that they know is important. There's also regeneration protection. This is tree tubes or exclosures. A lot of what we try and grow in the forest, animals are trying to eat. These regeneration protection mechanisms do have to be temporary. So this program from the U.S. Forest Service does not support any long-term infrastructure. So anything that goes in the woods has to come out. Then we have a category called regeneration management. So for those of you that are familiar with some forestry jargon, this might be your more traditional regeneration method, more intensive activities in the woods, but with an eye towards enhancing either the mix of species that are in that forest or potentially the structure and range of size trees that are in those forests, because we know, again, those are attributes of a forest that can help it be more resilient. Okay, next slide, please. And then our last category is a forest health category. So management with a specific forest health concern in mind. This could be invasive plants. I think all of us are familiar with how much havoc that is wreaking on our forests, whether folks want to do chemical or mechanical control of invasive plants. And then also sanitation cutting for people that are looking to go into a stand, we'll probably get a lot of calls around beech leaf disease. We're thinking people that are recognizing that as a problem, trying to get those diseased trees out in favor of some other trees or species that might be, again, more resilient to changing conditions. Okay, next slide, please. So who's eligible to participate in this program? This is one of the times where the money comes from matters. So those, again, are the two funding streams. There's the climate resilience and their carbon stewardship. Some of the eligibility criteria came to us from the U.S. Forest Service, and some of it was designed by us within the Maine Forest Service. So for the climate resilience funding, this is to target non-industrial landowners. This can include local government, so that was guidance from the U.S. Forest Service. And then we are defining that in terms of what it means for Maine. So I think the U.S. Forest Service says that a small ownership can be upwards of 50,000 acres, which is different, I think, than we might envision a small ownership in Maine, which is why we sort of tailored it down to what we see our demographic to be. So when we're thinking about non-industrial owners, we stayed within how we've treated those folks in our past cost share, so 10 to 1,000 acres, potentially up to 5,000 acres if you get some prior approval from us at Maine Forest Service. Basically, why do you need the funding to make this work happen? For the carbon stewardship program, this is intended to focus on private ownership. So that came from the U.S. Forest Service. That is open to anyone so long as they are private ownership, no acreage constraints there. We are thinking we'll use this funding stream to work with some larger landowners that don't fit within that climate resilience bucket. This will be a slightly different application. Funding has not yet opened up for this program. We'll be opening it up in June or July. All right, next slide, please. Another piece that's important for this program is to work with what are considered underserved landowners. So that is guidance that came to us from the U.S. Forest Service. That was an intention behind this program, was to work with landowners that are classified as underserved. We're using the definitions of underserved that come from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So those can be beginning farmers or forest landowners, limited resource producers, veterans, socially disadvantaged landowners. And then there's this category of what's called geographically underserved. If any of you are familiar with the tool, it was Climate Justice Economic Screening Tool, or CJEST. That was the map we were told we were allowed to use at the time we applied for the funds. That map is no longer supported by the U.S. Forest Service, so we were basically asked to recreate a map that we think captures who are geographically underserved individuals in Maine with input and approval from the U.S. Forest Service. So what you're looking at is the map that we created. Anywhere that's green is what's considered a geographically underserved community. Anywhere that's white is not. What goes into that data? It's really a combination of data sets. So it includes things like poverty level by census tract. There's some metrics from DOT about access to reliable transportation. There's some data around high school graduation rates. So we basically put a list of what we thought captured underserved communities in Maine back to the U.S. Forest Service. And then they said to us, this works or this doesn't. Admittedly, there are some places like northern Piscataquis County where you say, what's going on there? Basically what it means, there's not enough people that live there to get counted in those census tracts. And so even though we know that there might be underserved people in those communities, we're limited by the data that's been approved from the U.S. Forest Service. But hopefully we'll capture that in one of the other categories of being an underserved landowner. All right, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, thanks. Okay, so why does all of this matter? Well, it matters for a couple of reasons. One is that as part of this grant application to the U.S. Forest Service, they said, we will offer you a match waiver for these funds if 40% or more of your participants are underserved, which basically means we didn't have to come to the table with another $9 million. So that was really important. That's how we're able to participate in this program. And we felt really confident that we could do that based on some data we have from past programs, which say 46% or so of people who've worked with us in other cost share programs are considered underserved based on some of the tools that we have to identify those folks. This also matters because when someone goes through the program, they'll have access to a different amount of reimbursement based on whether they are underserved or not underserved. So if a landowner is underserved, they're eligible for 90% reimbursement. If they're not underserved, they're eligible for 60%. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a grant funded program. Like I said, it just opened up in March. That is the climate resilience funding. We'll be opening up the carbon funding in the next couple of months. Our intention, or as of right now, the grant is supposed to close in December of 2029. It is possible we'll get a 1-year extension because in talking with Forest Service partners, they recognize that first year we really weren't able to launch the program the way we'd intended. We'll see if that happens. At this rate, we do have a lot of interest in the program, and we may have more people applying for the program and not actually need to run all the way to 2029 or beyond 2029. But if we do, we'll be pursuing that with the U.S. Forest Service. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are we doing at the Forest Service with this program? We've been responsible for the program development and will continue to be responsible for the administration. We're doing a lot of education and outreach about this program. A lot of that was done with teams, was run through myself and others in the Harlow building, and now it's going out into the world, and it really is being pushed forward by our district foresters. So these are folks all over the state that are really well ingrained in their communities, and they're going to be the point person. They'll go out with landowners for a site visit to make sure that the landowner and that the property are a good fit for the program. There is a plan that's required to be written that basically outlines what a landowner wants to do as part of this program. District foresters will be reviewing those, and they'll be going out at the end to make sure that anything that has been funded is done the way we all expected it to be done, and that it looks good and that it's ready to be closed out. So they're really, really important in this program, and we're lucky because we have such an incredible team of people to help us get this work done and done well. Okay, next slide, please. We also are partnering with consulting foresters. So Maine Forest Service is handling sort of the big picture pieces of this. And then consulting foresters are the ones working with landowners to get plans written, to pick practices that make the most sense. Consulting foresters are also going to be the folks that are overseeing the work and how it gets done, whether that's being done by the landowner themselves, whether that's being done by a contractor or some other fashion to get the work complete. That's overseen by licensed foresters. We've had 4 trainings since February. We've trained over 80 foresters in that time. So we've got a really good group of people all across the state to go out and help landowners participate in this program. Like I said, there is a practice plan that outlines what exactly is going to be done so that everyone is in agreement up front about what we expect to see out in the woods. Consulting foresters do the implementation oversight, and then they're also responsible for landowner paperwork. We've seen in past programming that could be a barrier to entry for some folks. And so getting people specifically trained in how to do this program, we think will help with efficiency. All right, next slide, please. So some payment details. Landowners are eligible to participate in this program up to a $20,000 cap. This is taxable income. Again, it's 90% reimbursement for landowners that are considered underserved, 60% for all others. These payments cover forester time, practice implementation. They're based on not to exceed rates. All of this information is up on our website if people are interested in looking at that. It was information that we passed along to foresters. It's information we've been passing along to landowners. We just are trying to emphasize communication about this program as much as possible so everyone knows what's expected of them if they participate in whatever role that may be. Some of these details may change when the carbon money comes online, but stay tuned for that. Okay, next slide, please. So we rolled out March 15th or 16th. As of last Friday, when I put these slides together, we had 46 landowners who had done site visits. As of this morning, it was up to 51. 63% of people who have participated in these site visits are underserved. So that means we're hitting that benchmark to continue to get that match waiver, which is really, really important. The practices that people have been the most interested in, probably not surprising, invasive plant management tops the list, but also pre-commercial thinning and planting. And then those dots that you're seeing on the screen show where landowners are located. So we are finding that this is spreading across the state. And what I'm really happy to see is that we're finding landowners who are moving a little further north. In some of our other programming, we've seen a pretty heavy concentration in the mid-coast, which is still here on this map, but I think we're starting to spread some of the influence of where we're connecting with people through this program, which was one of our goals. All right, next slide, please. So in total of people who have gone through and done a walk and talk with their district forester and said they want to participate in this program, that totals up to just shy of 800 acres. So 775 acres are what people have requested right now that they think they're going to want to do some kind of practice. And you can see in that bar chart, it shows the practices on the x-axis and the total acres that they're requesting by practice on the y-axis. So of those 775 acres, 427 acres are people looking to do work with invasive plants. Followed behind that is the regeneration management practice, pre-commercial thinning, planting, crop tree release, early commercial thinning. No one has requested sanitation cutting yet, but that may change as beech start to leaf out and people say, oh shoot, what's going on in my forest? So we'll keep these numbers updated so that we can speak to folks like you about the program and just for our own record keeping.
RP?
Planting, regeneration protection. So tree tubes and exposures.
Is this pattern about what you would have expected?
I am not surprised at all to see invasive plants at the top of the list. We were getting calls about that before the program even launched. I did think that we might see, just on landowner interest, I did think we might see some more people wanting to plant. We get a lot of calls about that, but there are more logistics around planting. And I wonder if people had some conversations with their foresters and then we're like, maybe not yet, but we'll see what the numbers continue to do.
I'm curious just because of the question about the invasives. Are there the contractors out there to address invasives, or is that a bottleneck right now?
Yeah, that is a great question. The answer is probably both. So I did hear from one consulting forester who's been doing a ton of invasive plant management in southern Maine. And he actually said because of this program, he's comfortable bringing on a new employee to help with that. So there are some folks that are saying, okay, I can respond by adding my capacity. And then I think we will find there are people where there's longer waits. So we're going to be keeping a pulse on that too and see just what it looks like as this all continues to roll out.
Could you give a little more detail about the kind of projects that are being addressed with the invasives, like what kind of species and what treatments are being?
Yeah, sure. So I can give really general overview. So these are all people who at this moment in time have gone out and done a walk with their district forester, but haven't written their practice plan yet. And that's going to have all the detail on, are they going to do chemical control? If so, what chemical, mechanical control, what is that going to look like? But I think it's, we see a lot of knotweed, a lot of bittersweet. I think those are where the top two, when I looked at the data last week, barberry is another one. So these are forested ecosystems. So honeysuckle is another one. So those are at least when folks have said in comment, this is what I think I want to do, those were the ones that came to the top of the list. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm curious if there, at the last meeting we had, the representatives from the New England Forestry Foundation provided sort of an overview of their program through advancing markets for producers. So I'm just curious if there's any connectivity between work you all are doing and that program as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There is more than enough work to go around for everyone. So we have been talking. The New England Forestry Foundation folks are working with larger landowners. Our demographic is smaller landowners. So that's for this funding that has been released, that's the clear divide. As we open up the carbon funding, there is yet even still sort of, if you think about it as small, medium, and large, the carbon funding might hit the medium where NEF hits the large landowner and this climate funding hits the small. We're not trying to be competitive. We want to be collaborative because there's just so much work that has to get done. And we're talking with NRCS too. So communication is going amongst all the channels to make sure landowners are being directed to the program that fits them best. Yeah.
As well. When I think about this work group's recommendations relative to forestry, anything to do with forestry, it was predominantly focused on forest carbon, like figuring out ways to either incentivize landowners to manage their forests in such a way that you ultimately sequester or capture more carbon. Mm-hmm. Then there were elements that were trying to be supportive of the logging industry. And it seems like, there are many ways in which I can see that the result of this would be increased carbon on some lands and also employment for some loggers, pre-commercial thinning. Yep. But when you think of, I don't expect you to, have the recommendations memorized, but when you think of kind of the priorities of this work group and how this program overlays with it, do you feel like there are certain practices that are kind of more aligned or have greater potential to impact these recommendations than others? I'm just trying to sort of see where that nexus is.
Yeah, absolutely. So this funding, when we applied, was for carbon storage. That was the funding intention. And interestingly, we have not changed the practices at all from the original grant application that we put in, because good forestry does all of the things. So good forestry increases carbon storage, takes care of invasive plants. And so when I think about the intentions and the goals of this working group, I think what you're seeing through this program is an investment in our forests so that we can continue to have healthy forests that feed into, healthy contractors and loggers that take care of making sure we have long-term carbon storage. There is no silver bullet. Pre-commercial thinning is really important, but it doesn't generate any income, and in fact can be cost prohibitive for folks, but it's an investment so that down the road we can accelerate those forests and have hopefully sooner trees that are bigger, store more carbon, and are worth more money.
Right. I see Dana has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. Nicole, appreciate the opportunity to learn about it. So we represent about 225 contractors in the state of Maine. So I noticed, and this is really the first time I've learned, I knew this program existed, but I think from our perspective, the contractor's perspective, nobody really knows about it. So I appreciate learning about it. I guess you focused on the financial challenges that this funding is attempting to offset for landowners, but it really, I think, offsets are the practice costs that generally fall on the contractor. And I know you were asked just now about the New England Forestry Founder AMP program. So that AMP program is not just for large landowners. A big part of that program is to help contractors offset the cost of their practices, because when you do pre-commercial thinning, early commercial thinning, crop tree release, especially based upon the markets that we are dealing with right now, contractors are doing that work at a loss. And that's a big part of what the AMP program is doing, is determining the actual contractor costs and where they're losing money, and then trying to provide funding to offset those losses to make the contractor whole. So I guess I have two questions based upon the work that we're doing with NEF on AMP right now. I hear that the money is going to the landowner. How do you make sure that the money actually gets to a contractor for specific practices? That's question one. And then question two, are contractors eligible to work with you on this program? Because, I know recently, even in this group, there are many surveys that have been done with landowners in the state and how many use a consulting forester and how many don't. It's about 55-45 traditionally on harvest. So there's a lot of landowners that don't work with a consulting forester. So I guess my second question is, can contractors work with you to try to provide some of these services directly with landowners to try to, again, get the word out even further? So those are my two questions.
Yeah, sure. So I'd say we welcome all partnerships to get the word out because we want the money to go to Maine landowners. In terms of why it goes to Maine landowners or how funding can get moved around, that was given to us by the U.S. Forest Service. There was no wiggle room. You must pay landowners directly, and we will only let you pay landowners. I will say when we were having these conversations, so Maine received one of these grants. I think every other New England state received the climate funding, including a whole bunch of other states across the country. When we met to talk with the Forest Service about this program, that was a clear hold that every state partner brought up was how do we fold loggers into this conversation with us? And the program is what it is from the U.S. Forest Service, so there wasn't any wiggle room on that, unfortunately. But what we are hoping we can do as part of this program is that the landowner is free to choose who their contractor is. They do need to work with one of our approved foresters, but that they will be able to bring on a contractor to help with this. The rates are such that, there's flexibility built in to pay people to do what it costs to get the work done. We have been pretty open too about if there is concern, if people are finding that this just isn't working for them to actually achieve the work, let us know and we'll make adjustments. We've already done that. Our original intention was to pay 80% reimbursements, and we heard from consultants that's not enough. There's too much financial anxiety in the landscape at the moment, and we upped it to 90%. So I can't say for certain what changes we'll be able to make in the future, but we're definitely receptive to feedback and trying to make sure that all of the parties who have to be involved to make this successful can be involved. But also, my boss is here. And when in doubt, I will refer to her. Not to put you on the spot, Patty.
Thank you, Nicole. No, I think Dana, the big point is that we were
kind of dictated by the US Forest Service as to where the funding goes directly. And we attempted to, we tried, with the Forest Service to get more of a logging component in it and paying for contractors, and that was not successful.
I appreciate all that. We're partners with Vermont Forest Parks and Rec on their resilience grant, which is the same source of funding, the same program. And they were able to, I don't know, maybe they have the magic touch, but there is funding that Vermont Forest Parks and Rec through their resilience grant is going to be passing along to contractors in various forms for that work. So I guess where there's a will, there might be a way, but I'll just throw that out there.
We are all funded under the same umbrella of funding, but there were actually 4 funding opportunities. The funding that Vermont has to pay loggers is funding opportunity 1, or funding opportunities 3 and 4. So that's why they have the ability to do that. I think maybe I have one more slide.
Yes,
or I can
go for it.
wrap.
Thank you.
Okay, next step. So program launched. People are out there talking to their district foresters. We're seeing numbers roll in that are making us happy with how the program is going so far. Landowners actually get the official application on May 15th. So Friday of this week is when we will start getting back information about exactly how much funding landowners are requesting, and specifics of what they intend to do. That funding for carbon is going to open up in June or July, and applications will be open until we run out of money, and we'll be keeping a really close eye on that. And hopefully, I don't know, hopefully soon, hopefully not soon. And we want the money to get spent, so. Okay, I think that's it. Yep, and that's my contact information if people have questions or concerns. We also have a great new website that you can find if you Google Woods Wise Resilience Program. So information is out there, and if you could help us share, we would love that.
Thank you so much. Did you have a question, Molly?
I don't know if it's a question, it's a thought.
Great, I love that.
And because you rattled off a lot of the invasives, and one of them that you didn't rattle off was buckthorn. And I just think about buckthorn is probably something that's often overlooked in the woods, and it prevents regeneration. So it's it hits two points with one, but just making sure that the folks out there doing the work are qualified. And
yes,
right now I feel like you're going to see a huge variation in terms of the people and the management plans that come in with that. So I know you work with our staff, continue to do it. Really important.
Yes, we are working with people that have gone through the Invasive Plant Academy to be able to do the invasives specifically.
Oh, great, thank you.
Yeah, we don't want anyone out there willy-nilly.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. We're going to do a hard pivot over to agricultural issues. And Tom, I think the same amount of time that was on the agenda before, maybe wrapping up by 3:10, 3:15, will keep us on track.
Really need to after this, if you handle the role properly. You want to? I think I'm you. I think I'm you.
You're doing great so far. I have to say, some of the best AV I've seen.
Practice this.
If I can find my own.
You need to practice to hit the thing on the TV.
I would. So I'm sorry, I should have introduced you, Tom. I got distracted by T-ball. So Tom runs the Maine Farmer Drought Resilience Program, which is providing really valuable funding to farmers. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jody. Rare that I get to actually stand up and talk to this group after all the years now. I always like to go back to the original Maine Won't Wait plan in 2020, because that's what inspired some of the work that I do, Matt Boucher does for Healthy Soils, under Strategy E to expand the outreach to offer information and technical assistance to working lands, particularly in our case with agriculture. I always like to say we've done a very good job in the state with meeting our greenhouse gas goals, but quite frankly, the rest of the world has not. And that makes resilience and adaptation extremely important for us. And we hope that we have the resources available within our department and others to address those issues of resilience. Key points I'd like to make. First of all, Maine is a water-rich state. Our former state geologist, Bob Marvney, called Maine the Saudi Arabia of water. We get 24 trillion gallons of precipitation. Half of that runs off each year. 7 to 10 trillion gallons is lost to evapotranspiration, some of which is plant processing. And the remainder is available for groundwater recharge. So we've got a lot of water. So what's the problem? In agriculture, timing is everything. We have approximately 155 growing days from mid-May through September. Certainly in Aroostook County, their season is a little bit shorter. And for typical crop needs, it's typically 1 inch of water per acre per week. And the crops may be most sensitive to drought 2 to 3 weeks prior to harvest or at harvest. So what happens in the month of August and into September is critical for the potato industry in particular. Late August into September is critical to their economic performance in terms of having enough water to bulk up the potatoes to make them more economically viable as well as healthier for harvest. Severe droughts have impacted Maine despite all the water we have. For actually 1999 to 2002, 2003 was an extremely severe drought. There was about 32 million in crop loss demonstrated. I think in the 2025 drought, we've seen similar numbers with, particularly with the wild blueberry industry having been hurt very badly. We forgot about drought for a number of years. In 2016, we had a drought. It caught a lot of us by surprise, but it's now become more common. 2020 to 2022, there was a serious drought. And currently we're in a severe drought. We were in extreme drought. Conditions have been improving somewhat, but I will point out that last spring was a very wet spring as well, and we ended up with a flash drought and an extremely dry summer. So things can change very quickly, so we have to watch very carefully what's happening during the summer months. 85% of Maine cropland is not irrigated. So a large percentage of our agricultural resources does not have the immediate availability of water in the event of a drought. I always like to say that hope is not a plan. We can hope we don't have a drought, but the facts are we often do. And when you're in a drought, as I tell farmers, it's too late to plan for it or to act on it. It really needs to be planned out in advance. The legislature adopted the Maine Farmer Drought Relief Program in 2022. It took, I think, another year and a half to get funding for that program. But it does provide eligibility for Maine farmers to apply to the department for a grant to establish a source of irrigation water. We are not able to do field irrigation, big center pivot projects, things of that type, but we can provide a funding for a water source, and it's specifically to alleviate the risk of crop loss. We are trying to find ways to involve the livestock sectors. It's a little more challenging for us. We can hypothetically fund pasture and hayland projects, but they're not always competitive with more traditional crops. That's something we're going to have to be taking a look at in the next year. We heard about this from the legislature, and it's something that's going to have to be considered in the future. But this particular law relates to alleviating crop loss, and the legislature set the task for us to be sustainable, environmentally sound, and affordable. We have a $1 million non-lapsing fund, that's a one-time fund, and a $300,000 annual appropriation. Not a lot of money in the big picture of water needs in the state. What we're able to do is fund water source development grants. We can provide 90% of the cost with a 8% match from the farmer. This could be for a dug well. Frankly, we haven't had any applications, and as we think about dug wells in a drought situation, it's probably not a good investment of our funds. But we can provide up to $25,000 for drilled bedrock wells, up to $50,000 for water storage ponds, and up to $50,000 for a gravel packed well. We are actually just approved in our first application for a gravel packed well. It's kind of an unusual type of system. It's used mostly in the wild blueberry industry, in the sand and gravel aquifers in Washington County. Requires specialized equipment and expertise. We typically have to have a well driller from Cape Cod bring their equipment up to Maine to do the gravel packed wells. So we're not going to see a lot of those, but bedrock wells and water storage ponds are very common. And also, we did work with Rachel Shatman at the University of Maine in peer-to-peer groups, talking to farmers about what their needs were. Many of them expressed a need for help with planning for agricultural water management. So we have a small amount of funding that's available through our 16 soil and water conservation districts to provide some planning assistance to farms, up to $7,500 going to the district to provide that assistance. And they can work with subcontractors and technical service providers to provide that assistance. So we piloted the program in 2025 with $300,000 from our FY26 appropriation. That resulted in contracts for 11 drilled wells, 3 water storage ponds, and 10 water management ponds. Many of those projects have been completed. The ponds tend to take a little bit longer. We'll probably see those finished up over the next year. We're trying to do a 2-year cycle on these contracts. And just in the last couple of weeks, we've gone through a much more extensive project of releasing actually it's non-lapsing funds that we're using for 2026. We had a total of 56 applications this year. We were able at this point to fund 22 projects that involves 11 drilled wells, 1 of these gravel packed wells, 8 water storage ponds, 2 situations where we're going to combine drilled wells and pond systems, and doing an additional 8 water management plans. I'd like to just show you a few examples of what's been accomplished. I can't wait for the summer because we're really going to be able to see the results of having the first water sources in. And over the summer, we hope to document a lot of success and a lot of increased resilience against whatever weather conditions we're going to be facing. Tabbitt and Daughters blueberries. This land is actually Tim Tabbitt's dad, Clarence Tabbitt, who unfortunately passed away after he applied for a grant, but his son and granddaughters are carrying this on. There's 46 acres of wild blueberries. Before this project, they were hauling water by truck from a nearby stream, maybe able to do a couple of thousand gallons of water once or twice a week at best. I visited Tim's property, the Tabbitt property, and the drought damage was very evident. He lost approximately 65% of his blueberry crop last year. And he did point out that blueberries is a 2-year transition. So the damage that was being done to the plants last summer and fall will also reflect on their growth this coming year. So can have a significant impact over a period of time. Tim Tabbitt actually did this project himself and excavated these ponds, and this has provided access to approximately 1 million gallons of water, which will allow him to do much more efficient irrigation on the blueberry fields. Thomas Farms up in Corinth in Penobscot County, 250 acres of mixed vegetables. They have, as you can see, a center pivot system. They have several of them. It's a pretty large operation. And a couple quotes there from Frank Thomas. He was requesting help for a drilled well to irrigate 6 acres of peppers and tomatoes on plastic mulch because they don't absorb water well from a center pivot, and they can only cover a small portion of the area proposed. So they needed an additional water source in that specific location. He jumped on this project as soon as the grant was approved and got a well at 380 feet. The well yield exceeded their expectations, will cover all areas that they're trying to get. As I recall, it's between 10 and 20 gallons per minute, which is pretty good for the agricultural use. One other example is the Fitzpatrick family farm up at Holton, 1,100 acres, large farm, potatoes. And in their application, and I always want to point out these stories, reading these applications, there are so many good stories about the need that farmers have for these programs, of the ingenuity that they apply to trying to fix problems with sometimes very limited money. Pointed out that he had seen a 50 hundredweight loss, resulting in $750 per acre reduction in value. And it also has secondary effects in terms of that they would not irrigate rotation crops like soybeans or oats because those crops don't have as much value and they simply couldn't afford to allocate the water to those rotation crops. And yet, certainly from Matt's program, Soil Health, you want to have that good rotation and that multi-crop use over years. So this will allow more of that. What they have on this farm are a series of small excavated ponds, but they rely on snowmelt, which is great. But once you've pumped that snowmelt out, it's gone. With a drought resilience grant, they are able to go down to 400 feet and achieve 15 gallons per minute. And they're very happy with that. This allows them to refill those ponds and continue to irrigate through the season. So again, another example of a type of project we're excited about. As I say, I can't wait to see what the results are going to be this summer because we're expecting to see our first large group of farms really putting this into use. I mentioned that we'd had droughts in the past, particularly in 1999 to 2003. I mentioned that the crop losses were about 32 million. I want to point out that the voters, with the support of the legislature, approved 4 bonds back then, which gave our predecessor Department of Ag, $5.3 million for irrigation funding. With that money, we were able to do approximately 179 irrigation projects of various sizes. It was done over about an 8-year period. I did a quick check, mostly just Google search on who still has the names of these farms. I estimate that 85% of the funded farms in the early 2000s are still in operation. I can't claim that's the only reason they've survived, but I think having a reliable water supply has definitely helped. This farm is the Checkaberry Farm up in Parkman in Piscataquis County. And I was just did a site visit with NRCS, and I was just very impressed with the way they've been able to utilize that pond for all of their greenhouses and field crops, and plus provide a pleasant recreation area because when they have a little time to sit and watch the sun go down at the end of the workday. Last couple of things we're working on. Again, I've talked about planning. We have a shortage of technical service providers to work on agricultural water plans. With some of the drought resilience funding, we were able to reprint the Maine irrigation guide that was done by the Central Aroostook Soil and Water Conservation District back in 2003. Cumberland Soil and Water did a nice graphic update on that for us. One section we didn't get to change is section 7 on detailed assessment of irrigation costs and cost benefits. And there was economic analysis done by the University of Maine back in the early 2000s that really dug into some case studies on wild blueberries and on potatoes. And that's one thing I'd love to see the university work on is an updated economic analysis of cost benefit for these types of projects. It would be very helpful to farmers. And we also, with Rachel Chapman, did some training, agricultural water management workshop we did in 2024. Again, we're trying to find more people who are able to develop water plans to help farmers. Not every every plan is going to result in a grant, but it could result in identifying more efficient ways for farms to operate. So with that, I will take any questions that you might have. Okay. I will quickly go plug in.
Thank you so much, Tom. I find that I learn so much about our own department when I come to meetings.
Yeah, Tom, I don't think you mentioned, but it was originally called the Drought Relief Program. And in this last budget cycle, we asked for a change in name to the Drought Resilience Program because we were getting calls from farmers in the middle of a drought wanting to know how we could help them in a more immediate way. And so this, I think, helps to project a little bit more of it's a planning and,
Yes.
and sort of, yeah.
Just this last week when it was raining, we had a call from a dairy goat farmer with 150 goats, and their drilled well, 377 feet deep, had gone dry. 150 goats with no water. They need about 100 gallons per day. So relief is what we can provide. So we're trying to give them some technical advice, but yeah, planning for the long term is what's important.
Well, we'll pivot back again to land conservation, forest land conservation specifically. And we have Jake Metzler from Forest Society of Maine. And just looking at the time, we have about the same length of time as we had originally planned, just different time on the clock.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of FSM. And I'll get my presentation up shortly. But it is titled Forest Land Conservation, Climate Resilience and Funding Needs, because that is how this all comes together from on our end. And again, we are a statewide organization that works in the forest land conservation space, and a long experience with variety of landowners that we work with, and feel like what the goals are of this group fit with what we are trying to do, which is operate on a large scale. So you can go to the next slide. You all know well the recommendations put forward, but these are the two I'm going to kind of touch on is both focus. One of the recommendations was focus protection efforts on areas of high biodiversity values, carbon storage and sequestration, and cultural and economic importance. And if we can improve public access as well, but also recommendation to significantly expand funding and funding eligibility for acquisition, including through LMF. Next. So where are we and what do we see out there working with landowners? Mostly large scale projects, which means in this case, 5,000 acres and above, are opportunistic. Landowners, not everybody wants to sell land. And so these big chunks, when they come available, we have to jump on them if we have the opportunity, or hopefully we've been having conversations with landowners and then they are finally ready to work on a project. So once that happens, the conservation design phase of the project is where we can use the concepts that we're talking about, highlighting on that property what are the conservation values that help connect between conservation projects and forestry components that are there that we can help maintain. So those are the things we're thinking about as we find a willing landowner to work on a project. Next one. So for example, we're working on a project in Western Maine. You might have heard about the McGalloway project. In that case, we wanted to ensure that a large portion of that remains as a working forest. And by conserving it, allows the landowner to continue to manage. And, as far as conservation leading to economic stability, these are the places right here in Maine that the forest products from that property go to. And so to ensure that they can continue to go to those places helps ensure that stability in the marketplace and in the economy. And is at a scale still where the landowner can continue to support the loggers and the truckers that go and take those logs to those mills. Because sometimes you can conserve a spot, but it's not big enough to actually ensure that there's infrastructure that goes with it. So just specific examples of things coming off these conservation properties that you may not think directly are connected to all these different parts, but they absolutely are. Next. And then within our projects, in addition to thinking about the kind of forest management side of things, there's the climate resilience, ecological aspects that you might think more directly of, which is, and what we're working on and things that we've changed through time, putting language in easements to maintain cold water habitats, using areas mapped by IF&W to ensure that those areas get extra protections, working with landowners to either put language in easements to allow for stream restoration and aquatic organism passage, or after a project's been done, work on those projects where we have that relationship with the landowner and are able to work with them to put funding in place to increase the crossing in a way that is going to be beneficial for climate resilience. We did that in one project on the Golden Road on our West Branch project, bringing funding that we could access to help the landowner replace that structure. That's going to make it safer and better for the future and opens up lots of stream miles for organisms. Again, as I mentioned, designing within projects and between conserved lands, taking that into account as you put together conservation components. Our projects aren't always just strictly an easement. Sometimes there's a mix of fee component, or within the easement, there can be areas that are not managed, and carefully considering where those are as it relates to neighboring conditions is important as we work through projects. And then kind of the same thing, understanding when you are working with a landowner, what you have for a property that they're willing to conserve, but thinking what is the best tool for that. And for the parts of that is one of the ways that we do that. And that leads into the funding sources, because oftentimes funders have their ideas about how they'd like to see their money spent. And kind of that's going to be kind of how I talk about the rest of this, is matching those funder interests with landowner interests to success on the ground. And then for us, our mission is multifaceted, and maybe not every project has all those parts, but we like to continually look and make sure that we have a matrix of types of conserved land across the landscape to help capture the different parts of the pie, if you will, in terms of climate resilient projects out there. Next. So what you may not think of is you may think that the forest land base in Maine is static, but in reality, there's great turnover in landowners year over year. And this is data that I pulled from the state real estate transfer tax database. So basically in the last 15 years, there's been 1.5 billion in transactions in the space of properties more than $500,000. So major, usually those and mostly in the unorganized territories. That pretty much excludes anybody's house. And it's mostly forest land. And so you can see the scale of what's been transacted over the years, and it's pretty consistently north of $100 million a year. What we see within that is the prices of land range, but we're talking basically 700 to 1,200 to more, depending on what's on those acres. And the rule that we use when we talk with landowners about projects is that a CE, working forest conservation easement, is about 40 to 60% of that value. So you can go to the next slide. So keep that in mind, those prices. Here's a chart that I put together actually for a presentation to the LUPC that shows the scale and pace of conservation for the last basically 15 years. And what you come away with here is that knowing what we've, all the work that's been done, we average about 30,000 acres a year in new conservation, working really hard. When you pull out the first year, which had 400,000 acres, and that was the Moosehead Forest easement and all the conservation that went with the Plum Creek plan way back then. And so you take that out and we're at about 30,000 acres a year. So we have a lot of work to do to get to big numbers. And this is, you know, where everyone's working and where the big acres are to be conserved, if you will, in the you know, consolidated range. And so the reality is that's where we're at. Next. So speaking of big projects and what are the big ones that are out there? Where's this headed? There's three large ones that I like to highlight, and all three of them point to the partnership connections. So we've got Hilton Lands, which is 45,000 acres northwest of Jackman, which the Conservation Fund is primarily working on, and now is partnering for an easement with BPL on. The Wasataka project with TPL and the Penobscot Nation is about 30,000 acres. And then there's the McGalloway, which is 78,000 acres with TNC, ourselves, Rangeley Lakes, and Northeast Wilderness Trust. So even the three biggest ones that have been going on for several years now total about 150,000 acres. And those are all on different timelines to close. Our McGalloway will close this summer. Wasataka is on pace, I think, for the next couple of years, and Hilton, same general timeline. Next. So again, landscape scale projects, probably pretty low, especially as we talk about prices as high as I noted. Landowners are much more interested in considering projects on a 10 to 50,000 acre scale in a chunk. And a lot of the conservation project development is going to be based on where it is, you know, where can partners fit a project with their mission, the funder interests, some of the things that we would like to do, we can't do because there's not funding to do it. Folks aren't as interested in funding what I would consider a traditional working forest easement. They like more and more bells and whistles. And bells and whistles are great, but they cost, the landowner says, sure, I'll commit to extra stuff, but it costs more. So that balance is what we're always working towards. Next. Again, a discussion of real prices, examples of what we've seen and what it means for actual costs to get this done. Next. Basically what I mentioned, this is the diagram of how we put together projects. We talk with the landowner. They say, sure, let's do something. Here's what we'd like to do. And we say, that sounds good. And then we say, okay, funders, what would you like to contribute to the project? And they say, yes, but we'd like to see this part. So we go back to the funder, or we bring in other partners to say, you know, what these funders would like, what the landowner is willing to accept is going to be better with you working on a part of this project, all of which in the scheme of the relationship with the landowner is to get to a better place using the tools and accomplishing the goals that I mentioned at the beginning, ensuring that it can still be mostly a working forest, ensuring that there's meaningful climate and ecological protections in place. So we're constantly negotiating matching these things together. Next. So this is my last slide, and this is where the meat of everything really comes together. So I think, ultimately there are conservation opportunities out there. They're not going to come in the big chunks, but we can continually make progress. Just a little back of the envelope math there shows that, the goal from the Maine weight is increasing to 150,000 acres a year conserved, even conservatively, if you do most of that in CE and some in fee, that's about $100 million a year in annual need for funding, which is a big number. And so, the conservation funding from the public is both limited in how much there is and has been very volatile and inconsistent. Thankfully, the state funding has normalized in the last couple of years, but the federal funding has gone out of whack in terms of the consistency in understanding the timelines and whatnot. And with prices and projects being as expensive as this, these take several years to put together. And if you count on one thing early on and then it gets held up or not on the timeline you anticipated, it really throws things even more into flux. So the good news is there are partnerships. Every big project these days has multiple partners. No conservation organizations are tackling any of this alone, and private philanthropy has stepped up. New places that haven't funded projects in Maine before are coming to the table because they do see the value in keeping Maine forests as forests for all the benefits that it provides. Sometimes they see how they would like that to be a little different than how we would like that. But we've been able to match it up some. And again, the creatively matching all this together is what all the conservation organizations, not just FSM, are working to do to get this work done. But it's still slower than where we would want it to be. And that's basically the limit on the dollars. So that's the quick where we are in forest land conservation today story.
Questions that folks have for Jake?
Have you considered or applied to any of the congressional spending accounts, like the earmarks, federal earmarks, or?
We have not. Some of our partners have for specific targeted restoration activities. But no, that's something that we haven't tapped into. And usually that's where we bring in the partners, usually the ones that are more tuned into what's going on in Washington can help bring those kind of dollars. And I don't know if they have for any of their projects, but that's a good point.
Yeah. A couple of concrete examples of conservation easement restrictions that would typically move you from the 40% realm to the 60% realm of.
More when you build in reserve areas, because you're basically paying full fee price for that. But in the context of an easement, like just saying in this area of the easement, there will be no harvesting. That's the biggest thing. But also more prescriptive stuff. It makes the landowners more nervous because, they know things are changing. And so if you're suggesting that, specific buffers on areas that are going to take them extra time to manage around, that increases the complexity for them and increases the price for us.
Two thoughts or questions. Is anybody your analysis was really interesting to me, and has anybody done it for the organized jurisdictions? In terms of the same sort of information with regard to forest lands and easements and?
No, not that I know of. I stick with the unorganized usually because it's easier to find all the numbers. It's harder to find all I can tell you is in the organized areas, the values are higher, higher than the
and that's that's a little bit of what I'm curious about, because I know from a biodiversity perspective, there's a lot down there. But I did have something else. Were you going to comment on that,
No,
Andy?
finish your comment.
So the other thing I was going to ask, and again, back of the envelope calculations really quickly. When you said $1.5 billion at 700 to 1,200 acres, that's looking at 1.2 to over 2 million acres that have transferred hands over the past 15 years. And I'm wondering, are they the same lands or sometimes it's the same lands? And between the transactions, is the land being degraded? Is it the same? Is it just people buying and selling to make profit? Like
it all depends. Some of those are conservation buyers buying from an industrial owner and then taking it and then selling it to another conservation buyer, for example, or return to Native American tribes. I mean, not a lot of that, but some. Like there's definitely lots of different things going on in there. Some of it's between kind of large owners as they consolidate and trade a town over here for a town over here. And so the management may be generally the same, and it may be, inflated some, but sometimes, there's a lot going on in there. But yes, some of it is not new acres that have been sold. Some of them have been sold 3 times in that 15 years, just by chance.
Yeah, just a couple of quick reflections. A very good presentation. I think the numbers are compelling and a good reminder that while we are in a era where there's great collaboration among conservation groups and forward thinking on the state, the math that I was doing in my head was at the pace we are on now, it would take 50 years to get to 30%. So, and there's multiple factors, as you talked about. Funding is a limitation. The large 200,000 acre projects are probably something in the past, but it's a good reality check on that goal, and a couple other factors that I think that make that goal potentially even more expensive. Is, to your point, Molly, lands in southern Maine are orders of magnitude more expensive than lands in northern Maine. And one thing you talked about, forest land conservation. Another whole piece of this pie is farmland conservation, and farmland conservation, is very important as well, and is very expensive. So it's all really good information, and we're doing amazing work, but it's a kind of a reality check on the 30% goal.
Well, I'll just add, so there's a conversation going on right now. A farmland action plan working group has been meeting and grappling with a lot of that same, these are big numbers and how do we get there? But somebody reminded me recently that when that goal came out of the conservation subgroup of the Natural Working Lands group, it came with a pretty big price tag. I think it was maybe $100 million a year, which, once it was fed up into the process of coming out the other end as our next climate action plan, the goal was there, but the stated price tag did not follow along. So I think that we had those conversations. We knew it would be a lot of investment. But yeah, now it's us trying to figure out, how do you really make that happen? How do you really move the needle?
And the other thing I want to mention that I didn't, which is all of those projects, over the last 10 or 15 years, some of them have been purchased, some are donated, and there's some creativity in there in terms of some of it's a little mitigation stuff. Some of the bigger projects, some are just, it takes every single concept in terms of the permanent conservation to get there, and every acre is going to count. It doesn't all have to come in the big chunks, but the reality is that it's still pretty daunting.
30 by 60.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing. At some point, we may have that conversation about revising based on available resources, and the funding landscape has changed since we were first talking about that goal. So
we're going to need to. Patrick, you get the last word here, and then we're going to move to our final speaker.
Oh, great. No, I just wanted to make people aware that some counties in the unorganized territory are over 45-50% in conserved land. So it's just interesting that when you break it down, what percentages we're reaching and where. But
I took that slide out, but I did the one too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting information. And we're gonna want to give the same amount of time to our final speaker, which is Matthew Boucher, state soil scientist, and he runs the Maine Healthy Soils Program. So we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. It's field season and allergy season, so excuse my appearance and my sound. If I'm a little quiet, I apologize. Fighting the allergies this season. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Healthy Soils Program today, where we've kind of come where we started versus where we are now, and the through line to where I want to take this program. I think most importantly to keep in mind as we move through the presentation, Tom, if it doesn't work, I can just talk.
I'm only getting half your slide, Matt. I don't know if it was a large format.
It should be large. Yeah, it's probably large. It's usually large format for me. But we'll get bits and bobs. I'll just make it up. Yeah. So the main, do you mind if I stand?
Hey, do it. There's even a podium.
Yeah, I'm gonna go stand up here. I like to kind of walk around and move, and that's how my brain works, especially if there's no help from the help machine. Okay, so the Maine Healthy Soils Program was created by the legislature in something like 2021. I was hired in 2022 to kind of bring the program to life and make it go, essentially. The program itself has two fundamental pillars that I think are equally important. One is the technical assistance side, and one is the financial assistance side. Yeah, we've got some fun stuff in there. Don't worry about it, Tom. So the biggest thing with the soil health program that is of importance to me is that, as Tom had noted earlier, there's a dramatic lack of technical assistance available to farmers in Maine. Across the board, the University of Maine is shrinking. Sorry, Ivan, but our soil science department, it was almost non-existent for a period of 6 or 8 months after Ivan retired a couple of years ago. And the training and availability of the people who can get on the ground and provide support to farmers is just not there in this state. We don't, no matter how much MOFGA invests in people and how much the state, we don't have the people to match what we have on the ground. So technical assistance is a really important part of this program that is kind of my use case for how this program runs. The financial resources pay for themselves and are kind of the traditional financial resources that you would see provided to support farms. But technical assistance is kind of really where the I think the best return on our investment is. A really good example of this is we have our flagship grant called the Soil Health Implementation Grant, and that program offers about $65,000 maximum award to farmers to implement barriers to addressing soil health on their farm. A lot of farms use those for equipment. Some of them, one of the awards we made this year was for installation of drainage in a heavy clay soil so that they could get into the field and cover crop earlier. Things like that, ways that farms can innovate and address their soil health issues that are specific to the farm. The issue is that those things often come with new challenges and new changes to a farm operation. So needing the availability of someone to be there and provide that one-on-one hand-holding and coaching is key to the success of those funds. And so that's kind of where my theory of the case lands, is that the investment is one thing, but the support that we provide along the way is the most important piece of that program. This slide says, what the heck is soil health? And I think it's really important to point out that soil health as a term is an academic abstraction of things that we used to do in the farming world. There are practices that we used to have. There are things that we used to do until we found out that we could make an explosion and create nitrogen fertilizer. That is what happened. Then we had the Green Revolution, and then we had investment in fertilizers, this, that, and the other thing. There is no doubt and there is no argument that that green revolution was valuable to the agricultural communities of this country, but it has also had the additional effect of reducing the ability of a farmer to assess their land and make adequate investments in it from an ecological standpoint. The Dust Bowl would be a good example of that. As we move towards more Dust Bowl type things in the future, we are going to bring up that word resilience, right? I think the most important thing when talking about soil health and working with farmers and providing the support that we provide to farmers is that the implementations, the changes that you make to your farm do not make you more money. Not in 5 years, not in 7 years. What they do is when you have a drought like you had last year, instead of losing 60% of your crop, you lose 40% of your crop. I think being plain, honest, and clear with farmers about what these practices actually do for you is really key in providing that one-on-one technical support with respect to that and being very clear about what those results will look like. Tom, you can go all the way down to, let's go down to past milestones to soil health testing.
What's the number, Matt?
Number 8. So one of the programs that we adopted, so the other thing to think about with this program is that I kind of bin my technical assistance into 2 things, general technical assistance and investment technical assistance. General technical assistance is the type of technical assistance where on the program webpage, you can click a link, you can sign up to have a meeting with me, and we sit down, we talk about your farm's needs, we kind of do a little bit of intake, and then we start to establish goals. And that is more of a long-term generalized work. That's where we bring in a lot of what I'll call clients, right? We bring in a lot of farmers through this general TA strain and start with that on the ground work and establishing what the farm needs, where the farm wants to go. If I'm the right person to help them, that oftentimes soil health issues are actually kind of undergirded in succession issues or farm finance issues or things like that. So a lot of what I do is essentially intake, and if I'm not the person to help them, identifying the individuals or groups of individuals that can help that person. With time, we kind of shift towards an investment technical assistance, and I like to start most of my farms on this soil health testing program. So that's where I was today, collecting soil samples for farms. One thing to think about with soil health testing is that it is you're looking at the physical, biological, and chemical aspects of the soil that make that soil grow the thing that you need it to grow. The problem is we have really focused on the chemical for the last 100 some odd years, 150. So we get our standard nutrient tests from the University of Maine, and those come back and they tell us what exactly to put down for fertilizers, for lime, for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Problem is the lack of investment and understanding of how those things affect the physical health of the soil and the biological health of the soil, and how that then back translates into resilience and buffering your farm is there's a lack of knowledge or connection there. So this testing, what I do with this testing is we go out to the farm, I take the samples with the farmer, we walk the farm, we talk about the soils, we identify problem areas, we look at compaction, we look at water holding, we look at the texture of the soil, we talk about how the topography of the land affects the way water moves, how a drought year might affect that, how the soil texture might affect that, et cetera. We really try to focus especially on the physical texture and composition and structure of the soil, with the biological aspect of it being a little bit of next steps. Last year, I visited 95 farms and took samples on 70 farms. That's about a $60,000 investment in soil health testing. All of these farms were then returned with the data and a readout of kind of the options available to them based on my best estimate of what would be the most helpful. I think a really important example of this is that a lot of people, when it comes to soil health practice implementation, I'll refer to cover cropping a lot as kind of the premier tool that we have in the toolbox to help soil health and maintain it. A lot of people really there's a reason why, but a lot of people will plant cereal rye as their cover crop. Cereal rye is the most popular cover crop for a reason. It is also the cheapest. But it doesn't do all of the things that other cover crops do. And that's a really important layer to this, is that a lot of times where the amount of information passed on to farmers about cover cropping is good, plant cereal rye. And that's about it. So we don't talk about tillage radish, or we don't talk about incorporating a legume, or we don't talk about the biofumigation possibilities that some mustard cover crops are capable of. So what I end up doing with a lot of farms is sitting down with them one-on-one, going through these data and working through with them how to identify which cover crops make the most sense, and then designing the trials on their farm. Another big thing that I can't that drives me bananas is the idea that adoption is 100% adoption immediately. That is the easiest way to mess it up and stop believing in soil health practices, period. So if I'm working with a farm, we identify a percentage of the land that someone can lose if something goes wrong, right? And that comes back to the technical assistance side of things being clear, honest, and accessible if something goes wrong. So I get a lot of pictures of deer eating cover crops. Is this big enough? Can I terminate it? Well, you have to terminate it now because you have to get your thing in the ground and it's not tall enough to provide you weed protection. So you're not going to get the weed protection. So what's the barrier there? The barrier is this farm now needs deer fencing because the deer are coming in and eating all of their cover crops. And that is worse in a drought year because there's less available to those animals. So they find their way into the farm fields, and they chew down the rye before it can get any sort of biomass, which is in large part what people are trying to get out of it, right? Rye can do 1,000 different things, but if you want it to suppress weeds, you need it to have a lot of biomass. And if you're not getting a lot of biomass because there are animals there eating it, then you're just going to be like, why am I spending all of this money on cereal rye? About 5 years ago, a bag of cereal rye was $60 a bag for a 50-pound bag. Now I think it's up to 80 or 90. So the price of these things are going up pretty immensely too. But to bring it back to this level of investment in the individual farm really tends to have a lot of positive impacts, because what they then have is someone who they can go to and say, is this working right? And so much of what I have found on the ground throughout my time here is a lot of times it's just someone needs to send you a picture and say, is this working? Is this what it is supposed to look like? And I think that's like a really kind of universal human thing. And just having someone there who's like, yes, or this isn't going to work for you based on what I'm seeing. So let's go back to the drawing board and come up with something else. And not just saying, I spent $1,300 on your farm doing testing. Here's the data. See you later. That's never going to work with the implementation at the level that we're looking at, what we're trying to achieve in this program. We can go to the next one. So this kind of brings us to the flagship program of the Maine Healthy Soils program, which is this implementation grant. We get a ridiculous amount of applications into this program every year. And we've run it for 2 cycles, and we've now funded 30 farms across 2 years for these types of investments in them. You can see the numbers of the total requests. So we've given out about $1.5 million in 2 years for a total request amounting to about $9 million. So we are capable of providing those funds. And the way that I designed this program is with that in mind. I'm part of the executive branch. I understand that money is not up to me. And so I have to work with what I'm given, and I'm going to design a program that is going to support people where I'm at financially, not where I hope to be in 5 years. And so that's really how I wanted to design resilience into this program and make it valuable, is that now I have these 30 farms that are use cases for the variety of things that people can invest in to improve soil health. The other really important thing about this grant program is the intentionality with which we have designed the application. And that is so key also to expanding the ability to bring people into the tent in terms of soil health, is creating an application that is actually useful for someone's time. I have been an applicant, I have been a grant writer, and I have been a grant reviewer. And one of the things that has always driven me nuts about grants generally is that they don't do anything for you if you don't get the money. And so when I came into this, I wanted to design a program where you would apply for the grant and you would get something out of that application, even if you did not get funded. And the idea behind that is to ask questions to the farmer that gets them to think about that program, to get them to think about what they're doing on the ground, to identify it down to specific levels and layers. And a really incredible, just like important anecdote to me, and this story overall is we released the award letters for this program last week or the week before. And that's the hardest day of my year, every year. That's 80 people that I have to say, I'm sorry, you didn't get money. And you know, most of these people at this point, I know. I have talked to them on the phone. I've seen them on Teams. I have been on their farm. I have, you know, watched them carry. I've seen little children now talking. You know, like that's the type of like relationships that we build on with people we provide technical assistance to, and it hurts every time, and it hurts times 80. I always schedule a therapy appointment for the day after. That's a true story. You can ask Joel; he'll tell you. But I get this call last week from a farmer who didn't get funded. And he said, what he told me was he wanted to let me know that he had learned so much through this process that he ended up parlaying the work that he put into the application into a contract with NRCS worth $150,000 for cover cropping and rehabbing a hayfield, right? And one thing he said to me was the work that you helped me do or help that you did with me and the time that you spent with me gave me the courage to go after this. And so not only did he get this $150,000 contract, but he also decided to secure a loan to finance the piece of equipment that he wanted to buy through the grant because he believed in it so much. And he told me that a lot of the work that I did with him also gave him extra points on his NRCS scoring, however they do it. And that's not the only time that sort of thing comes back to me. And so for me, I know I've got 2 minutes here, so I'll just wrap it up on that because I think that's a really important way to wrap it up is that, you know, I will spend every dollar that I am given. But at the end of the day, the resilience that we're building in this program is not just resilience on the ground, it's resilience of kind of like infrastructure for people to be able to access the assistance that they need. And to me, that's why I took this job in the first place. I think I said that I wouldn't take a job where I was only sitting at a desk. Yeah, it's a really important and meaningful thing. And to be able to go to farms now, I've been here, this is my 4th field season. And I'm now going to farms that I started working with 4 years ago and seeing their fields. You know, some of them are brand new farms that just started when I started, and they're kind of my little case studies of like, this is what you do and this is how we start, and working with those farms and getting them there, and the belief that they have in these systems. And so a lot of it is about building belief in the system that we have, and just being plain and clear about it. And yeah, that's what I have. If you go to the last slide, that QR code brings you to the Maine Healthy Soils program where you can browse what is currently available. As you might have noticed, there are a bunch of other programs that have either launched or are going to launch in the future. One of them of great value to me is this NRCS top-off program, which will essentially pay a portion of the remainder left behind when NRCS says we'll pay you $75 for every $100 that the practice costs. We pay the last 25 based on a formula on the available applicants and the pool of money we have. This was a program specifically designed to help larger farms. I think a really good example of this is in the soil health implementation grant with some of the big farms who are looking at investments in really important key pieces of technology or equipment. Our grant can pay maybe a third for the costs of those pieces of equipment. And so while we're helping them reduce their loan debt through that type of investment, this is where we can get those larger farms that have larger contracts a little bit more funding to zero in on the development of soil health practice or implementation, whether it be resting, reduced tillage, or cover cropping or something like that. So that's all I've got. Wow, okay, that's pretty good for me. I'll take questions.
Questions for Matt. Well done, running from the field. Deal with a slide deck that is a little wonky. Thank you so much. And for all the work you do. Any questions for Matt and the program that he has stood up?
Yeah. I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, she was first.
No, Ivan, you go. Nope, you go first.
I picked you. Yeah, first, yeah.
I think, mostly thank you for that. That was super helpful and informative. And I think, Wolf Center is launching like the Northeast Farmers Fund. And I think some of my colleagues have already spoken with you, but just to the extent that we can learn sort of from you all in the administration of your program, and just figure out ways to be connecting, because we do have resources that we can be providing for similar infrastructure and financial and technical assistance. So it would just be great to.
How many cups of coffee do you drink?
Just one these days.
Just one these days. I'll get you some.
Yeah.
Are you tracking, or do you hope to track sort of from an outcomes assessment standpoint besides the dollars awarded type thing?
Yeah, so the soil health testing program is they're eligible to receive testing every 3 to 5 years. So the idea behind that is metric collecting over a period of time. With regard to success of like individual implementation, to me, that often is much more of a subjective assessment than there's not really a good way to collect data that is universal across a large scale potato farm, wild blueberry, and a 2-acre mixed vegetable that grosses $250,000.
Yeah.
Like there's just no good way for those metrics. The soil is used entirely differently. If I had it my way, it would be like very simple soil metrics like bulk density or percentage of land, and something relatively simple where you could see an effectual change. But yeah, with regard to with metric tracking, a lot of it is going to be really driven by what we learn from these first sets of soil health implementation grant results coming in and how people are using those equipment. I really think the most valuable way to leverage those and generate like useful data is actually to turn them into training opportunities and work with those farmers to say, you've now made changes to your operation. What are the lessons learned? So more of a case study development is like my long-term vision for it than like we sit down and we write down a bunch of numbers. And again, because it's not going to be yield. So yeah, I see a case study as the best way.
I want to make sure we don't have public members on the line that may want to make any public comment. Do we have anyone else on here that
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much for your presentation, and closing remarks for you.
Yeah, I would just say that this was a great set of presentations. Really appreciate the time everyone took to put their thoughts together. Nice complimentary. I think we kind of touched on a little bit of everything here. And the one thing I just wanted to make everyone aware of, if you're not, we have a conference coming up that I'm pretty excited about. It's called Wood Build Maine, and it's going to be actually at the Wolf Neck Education Center. And this is a conference that's really intended to showcase and celebrate the opportunities to be doing more with wood, more construction with wood, aesthetic aspects of wood in our designs and in our buildings. And it was inspired actually through an MOU that we have held with Finland since 2019. We've had a relationship with them, and there's a delegation from Finland coming that week relevant to forestry, and they'll also be at the conference. So really good opportunity to hear a little bit about how they have really put wood at the center of their architectural endeavors, and for us to be looking at some of what's happening already in Maine and what more there is that we could be doing. So that's on June 5th, and I think spots are filling up, but there are still some seats available if anyone's interested. and get you that information. Okay, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And in terms of our next meeting, we will have another meeting this year. It will likely be in November. We don't have a date yet, but we'll certainly circle back to IFNW to make a presentation then. And if you have particular sort of areas that you want to make sure are covered at the next meeting, just reach out and or exciting projects that you want to highlight. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll let you know that.